Everybody. It is, you got to believe, episode number 24. Number 24. I just can't believe it. Time flies. It's the end of the year. We're almost into November. We're going to have to say happy holidays soon. I find the whole prospect kind of scary. All right. You got to believe episode number 24 is going to be the third in a series of discussions about heart disease and cardiovascular disease relating to oxidative stress. Very exciting stuff, no doubt. For example, we've already discussed in prior episodes the Ohio State University study on vein grafts, and more recently talked about a study on the protection of the wall of coronary arteries with Protandim. So protecting vein grafts, which, by the way, are used for heart bypass procedures, so you certainly want them to stay open and not succumb to atherosclerosis. Also, obviously, you want coronary arteries to stay open and not succumb to atherosclerosis. But tonight, we'll talk a little bit differently. We're going to be talking about, again, oxidative stress and heart disease. And for the inspirational portion of tonight, we're going to be talking about Moshe Dayan, a modern Hebrew warrior. So before we get going, I'd like to thank God for allowing me to reach this moment in time. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in with us. By the way, this call is dedicated to Yoni Netanyahu, an Israeli Special Forces soldier killed leaving the Entebbe rescue mission in Uganda. And by the way, he was the brother of the present Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself and maybe somebody on the call that has not been on before. And it's a good idea in LifeVantage to always kind of introduce yourself and tell people who you are so they know what to make of what you're saying. I was born in Brooklyn, but at age 1, I moved with my family out to Long Island with a big exodus from New York to the suburbs after World War II. And I went to an elementary school that before I started it was built on a farm. The farm turned into an elementary school as the suburbs started being developed. And I went to school in West Hempstead, Long Island, played a little bit of high school football, and even played trombone in the band. We used to have, and probably a number of you remember this, we used to have patriotic assemblies, and we used to sing patriotic songs and listen to John Philip Sousa and feel really good about being Americans. And I'm very homesick for that because I don't know if that occurs anymore, but I digress. I went to college and medical school. I actually went to school nonstop from age 5 to age 30, training to be an eye physician and surgeon. And then I went into solo private practice in the Clearwater area of Florida, and I've been doing that for 34 years nonstop. Now, I absolutely love the practice of medicine and being an eye doctor, but in recent years, I've become more and more frustrated by interference in my profession and my daily practice of taking care of patients from insurance companies and government regulation. It's gotten worse and worse and worse. They keep giving us more to do and paying us less. Now, coding and insurance is the most time-consuming thing in the office, not taking care of patients. And the other day, I actually was talking to a patient. I said, I'm really sick of all this paperwork. I just want to be a doctor. And it just kind of came out of me, but that's the truth. So I was very frustrated. I'm more frustrated now, perhaps. But 3 years ago, I was introduced to a wonderful company named LifeVantage, a health and wellness company which practices or provides products in 10 countries worldwide, soon to be more than that, and a company that allows you to influence people's health and financial well-being. And this was a great experience for me to find out about this. And now, because of that, I see a path to the future without all the excessive regulation, without all the frustration, where I can look forward to great things in the future. So that's just a very quick summary of my background. And by the way, if I didn't say it already, I'm a Pro 5 in LifeVantage, and I am an eye physician and surgeon in my regular career. So let's talk about heart disease. Let's talk about this article, which is upregulation of phase 2 enzymes through phytochemical activation of NRF2 protects cardiomyocytes from oxidative stress. Now I'll interpret that. Causing cells to make more antioxidant enzymes by taking natural plant substances and thereby activating a pathway in the cells called the NRF2 pathway protects the inherent muscle tissue of your heart from damage from the byproducts and waste materials of metabolism. Pretty darn cool, I think. This was a study from Colorado State University, and it was done in 2012. The study states that reactive oxygen species, or the waste products of metabolism, from oxidative metabolism, cause cardiovascular disease. And Protandim is found to activate the NRF2 pathway and induces production of antioxidant enzymes through the antioxidant response element in the nucleus. Clinical trials are said to have failed to show cardiac protective effects with exogenous antioxidants. In other words, you can try to eat the right foods with a lot of vitamin, content. I guess eating the right foods would be good because you might get some of the things that's in Protandim. But let's just talk about vitamin use. You could take a lot of vitamin A, vitamin E, vitamin C, but studies have failed to show that that has any effect protecting your cardiovascular system, which is very disappointing because people thought that it was going to have that effect. Now, NRF2 does not only cause your nucleus to make antioxidants, it actually has the potential to induce 200 different genes. And we know now that some of these genes protect the cell from cell death and also protect against inflammation and scarring. So activating NRF2 causes antioxidant production and turns on genes that protect the cell from cell death and also decrease production of enzymes and proteins that cause inflammation and scarring. And that is very important because inflammation and scarring is a large part of the pathophysiology of many diseases. Now, Protandim is known to be 7 times stronger than sulforaphane, which is another NRF2 activator. As a matter of fact, in a study that was done on the behest of the company Biogen, when they were studying BG12, which became Tecfidera and is used for treatment of MS, the person who studied BG12 also looked at sulforaphane, bartoxolone, and Protandim, and this was a scientist in the Netherlands, and he found that Protandim was the strongest of the 4 and actually had twice the activation level of NRF2 of their product BG12, which became Tecfidera, and in this case, 7 times stronger than sulforaphane. Now, the study that we're talking about was on cardiomyocytes from a cell line from the atrium of the heart of mice. So they grew cells outside the body of the mouse, and then they tested the cells by inducing oxidative stress, seeing when the cells would die and whether they were protected, and checking how much NRF2 protein was induced in the cells and how much enzyme was made in the cells. So it's a very exciting kind of study. Now, the results of the study are the following. Protandim protected the cell line against cell death, which is called apoptosis. There was more NRF2 activation from Protandim than would be produced by exposure to oxidants because the NRF2 pathway is there for a reason. It is a thermometer, a thermostat. And the way it works is that if you get more oxidative species, reactive oxygen species, waste materials, it induces the production of antioxidants. But what they found in this study was that just stimulating the NRF2 pathway through exposure to oxidants was not as effective as inducing the NRF2 pathway from Protandim. So it was more effective than just the exposure to oxidants themselves. Also, they found that the positive effects were halted when the NRF2 system was blocked. This proved that protandim was working by activating NRF2. And what they did find was an increase in heme oxygenase, which is very important in cardiovascular health, SOD, and glutathione. All of these increased in the cell cultures. They're all very important antioxidant enzymes. Again, heme oxygenase may be the most important for cardiovascular health. So, phytochemical induction of SOD and heme oxygenase is thought to be an effective approach to combat consequences of oxidative stress associated with cardiovascular disease. So the study was very profound in that it did show the effects that were hoped to be found. I'm going to read you the conclusion of the study, and then we can talk about it a little. The phytochemicals in protandim were found to be a novel inducer of phase 2 antioxidant enzymes to activate NRF2, the master regulator of cellular defense mechanisms, and protect cardiomyocytes against hydrogen peroxide-induced oxidative stress. This was an artificial way of inducing oxidative stress by providing hydrogen peroxide. The protection afforded by the phytochemicals, the protandim therefore, was dependent on NRF2 activation, as knockdown of NRF2 abolished the protective effects. In other words, if you used protandim, but the NRF2 was blocked from being activated, you didn't see the protective effects. This was thereby showing that protandim acts by activating NRF2. So now we have 3 studies. We have a study that shows that protandim protects saphenous veins. We have a study that shows that protandim protects coronary arteries. Now we have a study that shows that protandim protects the actual muscle tissue of the heart cells themselves. So this triumvirate, I think anyone would say that it would be wise to decrease oxidative stress and help protect your cardiovascular system. Now I'm going to say something very important. We know that protandim can diagnose, treat, or prevent or cure any disease, but we know it has a profound effect on cellular metabolism and activates a system that is protective of the cell and helps against damage from waste materials of metabolism. Okay, this was really an eye-opener for me because we have everything at our disposal to understand and explain why it is so important to combat oxidative stress. And here are 3 areas of the cardiovascular system which are shown to be helped by reducing oxidative stress. Okay, that completes the informational part of our talk tonight. Now let's get a little bit inspirational. I'm going to talk about redemption, personal redemption, and I think we should all think about this when we have a bad day or we have setbacks or our business doesn't go as well as we'd like or somebody we really wanted to join us in LifeVantage decides not to or even criticizes us being involved in a network marketing company. Let's talk about someone named Moshe Dayan. He was born in 1915 in the province of Palestine that was owned and controlled by the Turkish Empire. His parents had come from the Ukraine, and they emigrated and started to farm the land on a collective farm known as a kibbutz. Actually, the first kibbutz ever formed in the area of Palestine that was then to become the land, or again become, for the 3rd time, the land of Israel. He joined a self-defense force called the Haganah at age 14, and he volunteered for British Army service in World War II. He actually served in an Australian unit. Now, one of the most famous things about Moshe Dayan was his eye patch. And you may wonder, how did he lose his eye? Well, it turns out he lost his eye fighting in World War II. He was fighting against the Vichy French in Lebanon, and this was in 1941. He was on top of a building, and he was looking through binoculars at the French forces across the other side of the town he was in, and a sniper bullet hit the binoculars, and the glass shattered and destroyed his eye. And it destroyed his eye so badly, and I can relate to this as an eye surgeon, that he was unable to even have a prosthetic eye fitted because the tissue was so damaged that the muscles were no longer there and they could not be sewn together around a prosthesis, and they therefore, it was an empty socket, and he had to wear a patch over that the rest of his life. Now, the information I read about Moshe Dayan is that this was a huge psychological blow for him. He started to stay indoors, not go out. He didn't want anybody to see him. He thought he looked terrible with the patch, and yet he fought through all of that to become a great military leader. He was able to overcome. This is the first big trial of his life when he lost his eye and had to wear the patch. So he redeemed himself from there by just finding the inner strength to still serve his people and his country. And then he fought in the 1948 War of Independence, making a great name for himself. He made such a great name for himself that in 1956, he was the Israel Defense Force Chief of Staff when Israel invaded the Sinai along with the French and the British and took the Sinai Canal from Egypt. And then, later than that, in 1967, he was in charge of the forces in Jerusalem that led to the capture of East Jerusalem in the Six-Day War, which returned the Temple Mount to Jewish control after it was not under Jewish control for 2,000 years. Pretty momentous occasion and quite an honor. He then was the defense minister in 1973 during the Yom Kippur War. But he made a huge blunder as the defense minister. At least people afterwards with Monday morning quarterbacks believed it to be a huge blunder. There was intelligence that came in the morning of the war that an attack was imminent. But he and Golda Meir, the prime minister, chose not to call up the reserves, which would have been very, very difficult. It proved very difficult because many people were in synagogue for the holiday, and it was very difficult to reach them because people put their phones off and aren't even reachable to be called up. But he chose not to call up the reserves or do a preemptive strike because they were afraid of negative world opinion. And they decided to take the first hit from the opposing armies and then retaliate. This was a really bad mistake because the Israeli chief of staff and the Israeli government underestimated how much the attack would be successful across the Sinai Canal and the Egyptian theater, and also coming down from the Golan Heights in the Syrian portion of the war. As a matter of fact, in northern Israel, in the early fighting, the Syrian tanks almost broke through, and they would have had a clear run to Haifa and the coast of Israel. It could have been the end of the Jewish state. And therefore, he, after the 73 war, resigned in disgrace. This was his second big, huge problem to overcome. You know, the second terrible thing that happened in his life after he lost his eye. He went into seclusion for a long time. I guess he meditated and prayed about it, and he finally reemerged. And then he came back to be foreign minister in 1977 and was instrumental in negotiating the peace treaty with Egypt, with Anwar Sadat, which has held to this day. When you think about that, he was humiliated because Sadat fooled him and outplayed him in the Yom Kippur War. He was totally unable to continue and went away for a while. But when he came back, he had the courage and self-respect to be able to negotiate with the man who had caused him that huge humiliation. And he served his country by negotiating the peace treaty, which has really changed the face of the Middle East. You might think the Middle East is in terrible shape right now, and that may be true. But the important thing to remember is there's been no war between Israel and Egypt or Israel and Jordan, two of the big neighbors on each side, since that peace treaty, and that is a major accomplishment. So then, unfortunately, Moshe Dayan died, complications of colon cancer in 1981. But I think an admirable figure, a figure that we can all look up to and understand that redemption factor that we all need to go on and still go ahead. If he'd given up after the eye was lost, he wouldn't have had all the successes gaining the military victory in Jerusalem that brought the wall back under Jewish control after 2,000 years. If he had given up after the disaster, that was the first 2 days of the Yom Kippur War, he wouldn't have been there to negotiate the peace treaty with Egypt. So I would say never give up, and there's always room for redemption in your life. Remember that with LifeVantage and in your life itself. In LifeVantage, we make people better, and in doing so, we make the world a better place. That's our motto. Let's keep doing it. God bless all of you. And that completes tonight's call. I hope you enjoyed it. And go spread the word about cardiovascular disease and NRF2 activation.